This is NewsNation Now.
And a good Thursday afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us here on NewsNationNow.com. I am Aaron Nolan, and if you haven't known about NewsNation, we're a brand new network that is unbiased. We started things up September 1st. Well, this week things changed because we added 3 more shows, including the Donlon Report. Joe Donlon joins us now to talk about his brand new show. Joe, I tell you what, we're seeing some of the interviews on the screen here. 4th day today. Tell us about the inspiration behind the Donlon Report and really this whole, evolution from what we started 6.5, 7 months ago to today.
Well, first of all, the title was not my choice.
And I can attest to that. Joe is one of the most humble people I know in this newsroom.
It is, yes, it's still odd to even have that on there and all over the studio, but it's an honor that's certainly not lost on me, and it's really a pleasure to have this opportunity. Not many of us in this business, as you know, get that chance. And so what we decided to do here was sort of extend our resources over the bigger part of the evening, adding Nicole Burley at 5, and then our hour comes on at 6 Central. And then Rob and Marnie go from 7 to 9, and then Ashley Banfield goes from 9 to 10. So the idea was to, again, extend our reach in the day part and expand our resources across the evening. And our show in particular really is aimed at trying to dig deeper into the big issues of the day, whether it's news or sports or culture and news, interviews, and experts to add some perspective and insight. That's the focus.
Well, and that is something, if you look at the news model, and I know a lot of us at home, whether you're watching us right now on Facebook page, maybe your favorite local station's Facebook page, local news can only do so much. They're confined to 30 minutes, and outside of the commercial breaks, Joe, you only really have about 23 minutes of content. And so what's great about your show is instead of taking 20 topics or 30 topics in an hour, you're able to really dive in and dive deeper on 2 or 3 topics that could make a really big impact for those people around America.
Right, that's the focus of it, because we know we have Nicole covering a lot of the news before us, Rob and Marnie covering a lot of the news after us. And at 6 o'clock Central, 7 Eastern, the fact is most of us, or many of us, already have a pretty good idea of what's happened today in the news, thanks to our phones or whatever we're watching online. We know basically what happened today, and our idea was to just, again, sort of dive deeper into some of these topics that a lot of people are talking about and give them more perspective and insight on what's happening behind the headlines.
Since we started NewsNation, you've had a very unique opportunity to interview a lot of folks. You went to the White House, interviewed President Trump. You have talked to Bob Costas about things, sports, everything possible you have really dived into. How much are you using your history of interviewing people in this new show?
A lot. You have to call on all of that. But I think, part of what makes, for a good question, I think, is just basic curiosity. And part of that comes from me, too, because I love to talk with people ahead of an interview to find out what they're thinking about. Because as you know, a lot of times maybe you miss the obvious question or you're not thinking of something that someone else was thinking of. So I love to talk to different people about the interview you're about to do. And I also like to talk with the experts when I can before we actually get on the air with them. Not necessarily the politicians like Joe Lieberman you see here. You don't get a chance to pre-interview them, but sometimes our bookers do, so you know what their talking points are going to be. But I also like with these experts to touch base with them because I want to know what they want to talk about. They're the expert. I want to make sure I prompt them in a way that leads to a good discussion and leads to answers that enlighten all of us. And as I've said before, I want this show really at the end for people to feel like there was something for everyone and that we all walk away a little smarter.
And I think you're doing a fantastic job through 3 days, Joe.
Thank you. It's been a process and a progress for all of us. This is something that's been new for me. Obviously, I've been a part of local anchoring for years, 30 plus, and then coming here to NewsNation started us on the original NewsNation newscast with Rob and Marnie. But that was more, I guess, traditional, anchoring of the news. This is a step out for me. It's something I haven't really done before, where you're in the chair for an hour and you're directing 60 minutes of conversation with sometimes 8, 9, 10 different guests, and you have to be well versed on all of those issues. So there's a lot of prep time that goes into it, and it's certainly a new challenge for me.
Well, and I want to talk about that. You and I joined up, started this thing September 1. I'm on the weekends with Rudabay and Gerard, and we do have a lot more time. How difficult was it for you to transition into this mode where you really have to dive in deep to a certain topics? And I don't want to say that any news anchor, news host is surface in their research, but you're still taking on a different level of knowledge in order to convey this to people who are watching.
Right, no question. And this has been a challenge that I've really welcomed because I to be honest, have never consumed as much content as I have since coming here to NewsNation, because you have to be well versed in so many issues. The other day, for example, you never know if you're going to have to do an interview on the situation in Iran with the nuclear deal, or whether there's a situation in Myanmar, or whether the situation with Taiwan in China. The relations with China is a big issue that's going on now with foreign policy. And we brought on a number of foreign policy experts to talk about a number of these issues that aren't necessarily top of mind. But the other night, for example, we led our broadcast with the airstrike in Iraq at Al-Assad, which was the same base that was attacked in January of last year. So that, and then you never know, the price of silver, the stock market, all of these issues that you're going to be talking with experts about, you have to be well versed in to carry on a conversation that's going to help make the viewers smarter again at the end of the show.
And there it is, making the viewers smarter and giving them an opportunity to choose for themselves how they feel about something. Talk about the mission of NewsNation, our goal as a network to make sure that we are unbiased in everything, and how you continue to walk that line. Well,
as we've all found, Aaron, it is a difficult line to walk. We all know that.
Absolutely.
And I think what we've done that's a little different than our mission on NewsNation is that we will interview a Republican, and then we'll later interview a Democrat. And it doesn't necessarily, for example, we didn't think it was necessary to book a Democrat to talk about the future of the Republican Party. Again, we want people from both sides of, or any side, or as many sides as we can, because I think two sides is too, I guess, restrictive when it comes to covering stories, because there are all kinds of sides. But we want basically to bring people on who know and are familiar with maybe the Democratic response or the Republican response. And I think people might watch it and say, well, wait a minute, where's the other side of that? My goal is, again, at the end of the hour, to bring people on who know these things, try to press them from the other side so that people who may or may not agree with this can get that side of it as well and have them answer that question. And then at the end of the hour, feel like there was a little something for everyone in there. It might not have been a Republican and a Democrat on that particular issue, but at the end of the hour and at the end of the week, when you add it all up, it's sort of like when you go out to have dinner with your friends, right? Sometimes you pick up the bill, sometimes your friends do.
Wait a minute, I'm supposed to do that every once in a while?
Right, and at the end of the month, you feel like, you know, every now and then you get the bill and somebody else picks it up. But on that note, I'm really excited about tonight because we have a couple of guys coming on, Hancock and Kelly. Yep. They are a duo down in St. Louis. They do a Sunday morning political show, and they're interesting in a number of ways. But what caught my attention about them is I'm from St. Louis, so I'm familiar with their show, and I thought it would be great to have them on. John Hancock is a Republican, used to run the GOP in Missouri, and Michael Kelly was a Democratic strategist, and the two of them became friends. In fact, they're so good of friends now, they hang out all the time. So to have these guys and do their show where they'll bring up these issues and then talk about what's at stake politically, and then at the end of the show, go back to their respective homes, or they go somewhere together to have a beer, which is what I like about them. In fact, when I called them to ask them to be on the show, they were literally playing pool together at Michael Kelly's house. So tonight, in fact, they're on the show, and we're going to talk about a number of the issues that are popping right now, including H.R. 1, the bill the House passed yesterday on voting rights, and also the George Floyd bill that the House passed yesterday, what's ahead for these, and also the Mike Pence op-ed that he wrote about the election results in 2020. So all of these issues are ripe to get someone on both sides of these things to come on and talk, and that's what Hancock and Kelly will do for us tonight.
Definitely sounds like it's going to be not only informative, but a lot of fun. And I know you well enough to know that you want that element as well. As you were talking about these guys having a beer, going to play billiards together, at the end of the day, you also want to be entertaining.
Yeah, and that's part of what we're learning too as we bring these guests on. They are interesting, they're exciting, they're adding, I think, a lot of engagement in the interviews that make it fun to watch, and that's the whole point. That's what makes for an enjoyable hour of viewing, and that's part of the goal here. We want to bring in interesting people, an interesting conversation, and again, perspective and insight, so that at the end of the hour, I think people feel like they got something out of it. That's the goal.
I wish I could show you a clip of the Donlon Report. Unfortunately, we can't in the format that we are, but an example of that is Tuesday's show. Joe spent a good 2.5 minutes only rhyming words together, and that was based on the simple fact that the news of the day was the fact that Dr. Seuss's publishers had pulled several of his books based on the possibility of some people being offended by them. But that's an element, Joe, that I think that you're bringing to the Donlon Report that is entertaining, that's a little bit of fun, but it's also really heavy on the information and then letting people decide for themselves. Are you upset that Dr. Seuss's books have been taken off the shelves? Are you happy?
Yeah, that was a fun piece to write, and it wrote itself surprisingly.
I'm not so sure about that.
It did. It wrote
You're
itself
such a good
surprisingly
writer.
quickly. Now, I appreciate it. It was fun to write, and I am a huge fan of Dr. Seuss's books. Read them to all of our kids, and I'm sad to see what's happened to them. But the other important point on that, and there were several made after that Seuss start to our show Tuesday night with the expert we brought in, was that this wasn't a decision made by the publisher. This wasn't a decision made by a school district. This was a decision made by Dr. Seuss's publicists themselves. And so that's important to keep in mind. And I think another point she made that is interesting, that no matter how you feel about it, there's certainly an argument to be made that unfortunately these books are being canceled. And that was part of the Seuss rhyme that I did. You know, I wonder what Dr. Seuss himself would say finding out these books had been canceled. You know, should they be canceled or taught in a different way? That was sort of that part of the rhyme, and that was what this expert said. You know, these are teaching experiences and learning experiences, and there are some troubling things in Dr. Seuss's past. We acknowledge that as well, but I think he definitely changed his ways, and his message to this day endures.
You bring up a very interesting point, and I want to touch on it for just a moment because I think it marries the mission of what NewsNation is. You asked the question in that report, and you just asked the question again, Joe, how would Dr. Seuss feel now? One thing that I can understand from an unbiased newsroom of where we're supposed to be, it's not our goal to answer that question. It's our goal to ask that question.
Well, that is sort of the point here, and you may have seen the promos where we talk about, I don't want to tell people how to think, I want to give them something to think about. It is hard to do that without at least intimating some sort of an opinion, and that's been the line that I've had to walk with these sort of monologues that I'm writing at the beginning of each report. We do it again tonight, as a matter of fact, where we talk about the incivility that is, I guess, pervading in the political discussion today, and the reason behind that. That's also why we're bringing in Hancock and Kelly to talk about this. So you're right. It's difficult. What I try to do is phrase these things in the form of a question, so it might not seem as much as me making an opinion or a statement as asking the question. Again, to get people hopefully thinking about something. And it was interesting, there was something I brought up the other night that my daughter reacted to in a way that management here was happy to hear about, because it was a comment that I had made about just the uncertainty of the pandemic and how we've handled it. And what I didn't understand at the point was, how can we be shoulder to shoulder on an airplane for a 4-hour flight, but we can't have kids in a classroom who are 10 or 15 feet apart? Costco's are full, but movie theaters were closed. So much of it didn't make sense, and I think that's part of why there's been this discussion and this divide in our country about how we've handled the pandemic. But what I said about the airplanes, it was just one of those moments where my daughter said out loud as she was watching it, you know, I hadn't really thought of that. So that's another thing we're hoping to do here, is bring up points and bring up, I guess, angles of these stories with the experts involved to give people, again, something to think about.
As we wrap up here, and you've mentioned you're busy, you guys are writing back there, you've got a lot going on. How much have you learned over the past, well, first off, I want to ask, how much have you learned in your career that you're attributing to the Donlon Show, that you're using in the Donlon Report, and then how much have you learned in building this network that you can use in the Donlon Report?
Ooh, that's heavy. I would say everything I've learned up to this point has helped me, I guess, do what I'm doing here. From interviewing, as you said, from writing. I used to love writing. I used to write a lot more on Facebook, but with schedules and other things, I got away from it a little bit. So this has allowed me to get back to that kind of writing where I was doing similar things, giving hopefully people something to think about, not necessarily telling them how to think. So that part of it has been very helpful to what I'm doing now. Every day they'll come to me and say, hey, we want you to write a monologue on this or write something on that. And typically that starts at 9:30 or 10 in the morning, and it usually takes me a half an hour or so to write that and then craft it over the course of the afternoon. And the producers behind this this broadcast have been fantastic at producing up these segments and including lots of visual elements to make it more engaging visually. So that part's been great. And I think what I've learned in the last 4 to 5 months is a journey that's still uncharted. I mean, I've said this before. I thought I would retire in Portland when I was at the NBC station there for 20 years, but in 2017, WGN here in Chicago called, and I ended up getting the job at WGN local here, and then that grew into this job here at NewsNation. And as we all did, sort of took this leap of faith for this project and this experiment, and we're all still on it. To be determined.
TBD
Yeah.
Is where we are. Joe Donlon, the Donlon Report, coming your way tonight. 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock Central on NewsNation. Joe, thank you so much, man. We appreciate you taking the time.
You bet, Aaron. Thanks.
All right, and if you want to know more about NewsNation, check out our website. It is newsnationnow.com. On the upper right-hand corner, there's a little search bar. If you don't know how to get us, how your television provider gets us, put in your zip code. We'll tell you exactly how that is, but make sure you join the Donlon Report tonight. Joe, again, thank you so much. I am Aaron Nolan. Have a fantastic Thursday afternoon.